So by now you likely know the main details of the Las Vegas shooting, with, last I checked, 58 people dead and over 400 injured. Now, I don't want to cover this event like most places will cover a shooting like this, so I don't want to discuss the shooter and his life or his details. I have no interest in that, and I don't want to cover just, footage from the event and eyewitness reports. What I do want to discuss is how people are reacting to it, including some dumb reactions and some reactions from politicians, and also how the NRA plays into this, and at the end of this, what we can take away from this, and how we can possibly move into a direction of maybe making some progress on gun legislation. So let me first start with some reactions. So first, Fox News. So while the website had a standard reaction with the focus on the shooter, and of course a criticism of how Hillary Clinton reacted, which I will get to in a minute, what I found interesting was this reaction from a witness that Fox News thought was worth highlighting in a tweet. Witness on first responders. In a world where everyone is kneeling, I saw hundreds of people standing up and running towards the danger. So Fox News thought it was worth highlighting a quote from a witness that, if you take 2 seconds to think about it, doesn't make any sense. So, the kneeling in the NFL during the national anthem, that's about protesting systemic racism in America. There's no correlation between that and a mass shooting, or the reaction of responders to a mass shooting. How the witness conflated those two things, or brought those two things together and somehow found a way to relate them, and then Fox News goes on and highlights that in their tweet and posts that on Twitter, this is clearly a way to continue sowing the divide between these two sides, either both on the racial issue and the NFL issue, and with guns in America and the gun problem. So there really is no other purpose I can understand a witness saying a dumb thing on TV, but then to highlight that in a tweet as if they're making a smart point is just boneheaded when there's no point here to be had. Now, let's get to somebody who should know better, and that's Kentucky Governor Matt Bevin, who tweeted this. To all those political opportunists who are seizing on the tragedy in Las Vegas to call for more gun regulations, you can't regulate evil. So again, this is one of those reactions where if you take 2 seconds to think about it, doesn't make any sense. So if we shouldn't regulate evil, then why have any laws at all? Why is murder illegal? Why can't you maybe go buy a loaded tank and drive that around? I mean, what's the point of law? What's the point of politicians? What's the point of anything? What's the point of cops? If you can't regulate evil, if you can't do anything to suppress evil, then why bother trying? I mean, some of these things are just sort of obvious. Because if you allow people to do whatever they want, then the most evil of the people, if you want to just say it's evil that's controlling them, the most evil ones will be able to do even more evil acts and kill even more people. So yes, we should look at gun regulations, and we should find ways to better prevent this sort of thing from happening. Now let's go to Bernie's reaction. Now, Bernie Sanders, he tweeted out his initial tweet to this tragedy. I wasn't really a fan of. So this is what he said. My thoughts are with the families and friends of the victims and all those wounded in the horrific Las Vegas shooting. So this is the type of standard cookie-cutter political reaction that I don't care for, especially when it's coming from somebody like Bernie Sanders, who I hold to a higher regard and I just expect more from. So thoughts and prayers. Great. That's great. I mean, I'm actually kind of glad Bernie didn't include prayers in that, but okay, you have your thoughts with the families and the victims. How about we get to some solutions? And thankfully, he did follow up that tweet with a few other tweets about how we need stricter gun regulations. And look, I think Bernie's great most of the time, but if he's going to do something that I don't agree with, then I'm going to call it out. And interestingly enough, in this case, Hillary Clinton, I think actually had the better reaction. So she tweeted this: "The crowd fled at the sound of gunshots. Imagine the deaths if the shooter had a silencer, which the NRA wants to make easier to get. Our grief isn't enough. We can and must put politics aside, stand up to the NRA, and work together to try and stop this from happening again." So the reason I liked this reaction is because Hillary Clinton calls out the NRA by name and puts a target on the group that I would say is largely to blame for a lot of these mass shootings and the gun culture in America in general. And she also calls out how the NRA is trying to push legislation to make silencers or suppressors easier to purchase, which would have made this situation much worse. But now I want to get to some more interesting fallout from this tragic event, and that's the fact that stock prices for gun manufacturers have now gone up. According to MarketWatch, Smith & Wesson parent American Outdoor Brands stock jumped 2.3%. Sturm Ruger & Co. shares climbed 3.7%. And Vista Outdoor Inc. rose 1.4%. It's the same thing that happened after the shooting at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, after San Bernardino, and after the shootings in Aurora, Colorado, and Sandy Hook. So every time there's a mass shooting, the stock prices of these gun manufacturers go up. And the reason for that is because people fear every time there's a mass shooting that there's going to be stronger gun control legislation. And because of that, the stock prices go up because people buy more guns after mass shootings. Gun sales rose during President Obama's years in office out of fears that a Democrat in the Oval Office would put more gun control in place. Since President Trump was elected, after being endorsed by the NRA, share prices in gun manufacturers dropped because consumers no longer feared gun control legislation. So I just think it's funny to point out that shares in gun manufacturers dropped once they got the president that they actually wanted. But under mass shootings, that goes back up. And there's not much that we can really do about that. But what we can do is look at why these gun manufacturers have so much power within Congress. And that answer is because of the NRA. So let's look at how much money the NRA actually spends on elections. So in the 2015-2016 cycle, they spent $54 million on outside spending, which is money that's not directly given to the candidate, but is put into something like a super PAC and then used either to support that candidate or to use it against their opponent. And if we dig into the numbers, we can see that only $265 was spent for Democrats, but $37 million was spent against Democrats, and $17 million was spent for Republicans. And then if we do actually look at the money given to candidates, the NRA spends about $5,000 to $10,000 giving money to the actual candidates themselves. Okay, so with the NRA owning half of Congress, where does this really leave this gun debate? So I'm going to take a position that maybe a lot of you won't agree with, but I think if I explain it and you wait and you listen, then you understand where I'm coming from and how it may actually be effective. So what I think the Democratic Party needs to do now is vocally, openly push for a ban on guns and a buyback program to buy back the guns that people own. Now, before you turn the video off and think I'm crazy, I know it's not going to go through. I completely understand there are too many guns in the US. You're never really going to be able to ban guns. And even if you do, there's always going to be an underground market because there are so many guns already in the country that you just can't get rid of them all. The country's too big, too many people have guns, and people have multiple guns. And there's this gun culture where people just, they love their gun so much and they're never going to give it up. So I don't expect that to happen. But what this strategy would do is it would actually push the discussion on gun legislation to the left. That way, maybe, just maybe, the conservatives, the Republicans, would be forced to now bring the discussion closer to where Democrats actually currently want, which is stricter gun regulation. So by pushing for something as far left as banning all guns, you now move the conversation to the left and may actually be able to meet in the middle on some proper gun regulations. So that's where I come from this. I think that's a strategy that the Democratic Party should at least try, because they haven't tried that yet. They spend way too much time defending their positions and and saying and acting like, oh no, we're not gonna, don't worry, we're not gonna ban your guns, we're not taking your guns away, we're all pro Second Amendment, blah blah blah. They play defense way too much. It's now time to play offense. We're gonna ban your guns. Oh, you don't like that? Well, that's too bad. We're gonna ban your guns. Oh, now you want to come and crawl back to us and say, okay, maybe we're open to some gun regulations because we don't want to ban guns, but let's talk about some proper gun regulations. See how that works? That's the game that the Republicans play. They play the game of moving the conversation so far right that it pulls the Democratic Party to the right. And the Democratic Party currently could almost be confused for the Republican Party of the 90s because of how the conversation has moved so far into conservative territory. So to move it back into proper territory where the left and the progressives actually have a voice, you need to start bringing up more extreme left positions. And that can move the conversation to the left. So that's where I think this should go. I don't think the Democratic Party is going to use that advice. But if they did, it may actually get something done.